The alarm started 3 seconds after the wayward Ember crossed the quarantine line, and Cale Voss had never heard a ship scream quite like that before. Red light flooded the cockpit. Every screen lit up with warnings in 4 different alien languages, all of them saying some version of the same thing. Turn back. Kyle didn't turn back. He gripped the controls tighter and kept his eyes on the dead star growing larger in the front viewport, a black, cold thing hanging in space like a wound that never healed. "Tell me those are just proximity sensors being dramatic," he said. "They are not being dramatic." Priya's voice crackled through the comm from the engine bay, sharp and fast the way it always got when something was actually wrong. "Kyle, we are inside a quarantine zone that 4 separate governments marked as forbidden. I don't think the ship is exaggerating." Doc Wren's voice came next, older, quieter, the kind of calm that made people nervous instead of comforted. "Whatever's in there, it's been sealed off for a reason. We should not be here. We're broke, Doc. We're not here for the view." Cale had told himself the same thing 100 times in the last 2 days. Ever since the star chart fragment landed in his hands from a source he still wasn't sure he trusted. Var Ashai. A dead system, stripped from every public star map, its coordinates scrubbed from Coalition archives so thoroughly that even black market data brokers charged a fortune just to whisper the name. A system like that meant one of 2 things. Either it held nothing worth finding or it held something worth burying. Cale was betting everything he had left on the second option. The wayward Ember shuddered as it dropped further into the system, past debris fields of shattered metal that didn't match any hull design Cale recognized. Not human, not any of the 4 major alien powers he'd traded with over the years. Older, the wreckage drifted in slow, silent orbits around the dead star, fragments of something that had died a very long time ago and never been allowed to rest. "I'm reading structures," Priya said. "Big ones, half buried in a debris ring near the 3rd planetoid. Could be worth a fortune if even a 1/10 of it is salvageable. Or it could be the reason nobody's allowed in here," Doc Wren muttered. Cale eased the ship toward the ring anyway. He'd spent his whole life being told humanity didn't belong at the table, not in coalition trade routes, not in alien research consortiums, not in any of the places that mattered. Humans were tolerated, useful sometimes, never respected. Every other species in known space had history going back tens of thousands of years, empires that rose and fell before humans had figured out fire. Kyle was tired of being the newest, poorest, least trusted species in the room. One good salvage run in a forbidden system could change that, could change everything. He didn't notice M055 had gone quiet until the silence became strange. "M0, systems check," Kyle said. Nothing. The little AI unit floated near the console, its optical ring usually pulsing a steady soft blue. Right now it wasn't pulsing at all. It had gone completely dark, motionless like something holding its breath. "Emero, I am here," the AI said at last, and its voice was wrong, flatter, slower, as if each word had to travel a much longer distance than usual to reach its speakers. "You should not have come here, Cale." Cale frowned. "You've never told me not to take a job before. This is not a job. A pause, longer than any pause M055 had ever taken in the 3 years Cale had owned it. This is a grave." Before Cale could ask what that meant, the entire ship lost power. Every light died at once. The hum of the engines cut out mid-breath, leaving nothing but the terrible silence of a ship adrift with no thrust, no shields, no weapons. Emergency lighting flickered on a few seconds later, dim red strips barely enough to see by. And in that half-light, Cale saw Priya's face appear in the cockpit doorway, pale and furious. "That wasn't a malfunction," she said. "Something shut us down. From outside." "That's not possible," Kyle said, even as every system readout in front of him confirmed exactly how possible it was. Doc Wren appeared behind her, a hand resting instinctively on the sidearm at his hip, an old habit from a life he never talked about. His eyes were fixed on the front viewport, and something in his expression made Kyle's stomach drop before he even turned to look. The dead star was still there, black and silent, exactly where it had been a minute ago. Except now something was blocking it. A shadow had spread across the front of the star, vast and slow, swallowing the faint corona of light that still bled from its dying edges. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't debris. It moved the way smoke moved underwater, thick and deliberate, folding and unfolding across a scale that made the wayward ember look like a child's toy adrift in a bathtub. "Kyle." Priya's voice had dropped to barely a whisper. "What is that?" Kyle didn't answer because he didn't have one. He stared at the shape swallowing the light of a dead sun and felt, for the first time since he was a boy on a colony world watching his parents' ship burn on a landing pad, genuine fear settle into his chest like a stone. M055's optical ring flared to sudden, painful brightness. "It knows we're here," the AI said, and this time its voice shook. An AI unit, shaking, something Kale had never once witnessed in 3 years. "It has always known. It has been waiting." "Waiting for what?" Kale demanded. The shadow across the dead star pulsed once like something inhaling. Every speaker on the ship crackled to life at the same moment. Comms, internal address, even Priya's personal earpiece 3 decks away, all of them screaming static for one heartbeat before falling into a silence so complete it hurt. Then a voice spoke. It came from everywhere and nowhere. Not through the ship's speakers exactly, but somehow beneath them, inside the metal itself, inside the bones of everyone standing in that cockpit. It was not a human voice. It was not any alien language Kale had ever heard. And yet somehow he understood it perfectly. The way you understand a word in a dream, even though no one actually says it. One word. A name, maybe. A warning. Maybe. Kale would spend the rest of his life trying to decide which. Finally, the lights went out completely. And in the absolute dark of a dead ship, drifting powerless before something ancient enough to blot out a star, Kale Voss heard something move, slow, deliberate, patient, somewhere just outside the hull. Power returned 12 minutes later, and by then Kyle had already decided that 12 minutes in the dark, listening to something move outside a ship with no working engines, was the longest 12 minutes of his life. The light snapped back on all at once, harsh and white, and the shadow across the dead star was gone. No trace of it. No sign anything had ever blocked the star's faint corona at all, except for the 4 terrified people standing in the cockpit, and an AI unit still trembling faintly in the corner. "Systems are back," Priya said, breathless, already moving to the console. "Engines, life support, everything. It's like nothing happened." "Something happened," Doc Wren said. He hadn't moved from the doorway. His hand was still resting on his sidearm. "Get us a burn plan. We're leaving." Kale should have agreed. Every instinct in his body told him to agree. Instead, he looked at the debris ring still drifting outside the viewport, at the ancient wreckage of something that had died defending this system, and felt the same stubborn pull that had gotten him into every bad decision of his adult life. "We came here for a reason," he said quietly. "We came here to get paid," Doc Wren snapped, "not to get eaten by whatever that was." "It could have killed us," Kale said. "It didn't. It shut us down, it said one word, and it left. That's not a predator, Doc. That's something else." Priya looked between them, then down at her scanner, and her expression shifted from fear into something more complicated. The particular look she got when curiosity started winning a fight against common sense. "There's a structure on the 3rd planetoid still intact. Whatever's causing the power interference, it's strongest near there. If we want answers, that's where they are." Doc Wren stared at her like she'd lost her mind. Then he sighed. The long, resigned sigh of a man who had lost this argument before it started. 30 minutes. We land. We look. We leave. No matter what we find. They found the ruins an hour later, half buried under centuries of frozen dust on a planetoid with no atmosphere and no warmth, lit only by the wayward embers' floodlights cutting through absolute dark. The structure rose out of the ground like a broken rib cage, curved black spires reaching up at angles that hurt to look at directly. as if the architecture itself had been built by something that didn't experience space the same way humans did. Cale's boots crunched against frost as he stepped down the ramp, rifle in hand, Priya close behind him with a scanner, Doc Wren covering the rear. M055 floated ahead of them all, its optical ring pulsing in a slow, uneven rhythm that Cale had never seen before. "You've been here," Cale said to the AI. It wasn't a question. M055 didn't answer right away. "I don't know," it finally said. "But something in me recognizes this place. That should not be possible." Priya's scanner buzzed. She frowned at the readout, then looked up at the walls surrounding them, covered floor to ceiling in carved symbols that seemed to shift at the edge of Cale's vision whenever he tried to focus on them directly. These markings. I've seen fragments of this script before, in old Coalition archive records. Only fragments, though. Half of it was redacted. Redacted by who? Cale asked. That's the interesting part, Priya said. By everyone. Every major species has some version of this system flagged. Human Colonial Archives, the Threl Compact, the Assyrian Directorate. All of them scrubbed references to Varashai from public record around the same time period, roughly 1100 years ago. Doc Wren had gone very still. Cale noticed it immediately, the way the old medic's jaw tightened, the way his eyes moved over the ruined walls like he was reading something none of the rest of them could see. "Doc?" 1100 years, Doc Wren repeated softly. "That timeline. I've heard it before." "Where?" Doc Wren didn't answer. He walked further into the ruin instead, past a collapsed archway, into a wide chamber where the ceiling had fallen away entirely, open to the black sky above. In the center of the chamber stood a single structure, untouched by the collapse around it, a tall, curved pillar of dark material, humming faintly, with a light Cale's flood lamp couldn't fully explain. "This isn't a settlement," Doc Wren said, his voice flat in a way Cale had never heard before. "It's a containment site." "Containment for what?" Priya asked. Doc Wren reached out and touched the pillar, and the moment his fingers made contact, the symbols across the entire chamber flared to life, cascading light rippling outward from where he stood. Cale raised his rifle on instinct, but nothing attacked. Instead, the pillar's light resolved into something almost like an image, fractured, alien, impossible to fully parse, but unmistakably showing shapes. War. Fire spreading across a system that had once been full of light instead of dead and cold. Something vast unfolding across the black between stars, and smaller things fighting against it, dying against it, for reasons the image couldn't explain. "They built this to hold something back," Doc Wren said. "Whatever we saw in the cockpit, it's not the threat, it's the guard." M055's optical ring pulsed violently, and its voice, when it spoke, came out fractured, layered, almost like two voices speaking at once. That is not entirely true. Everyone turned toward the little AI floating in the center of the ruined chamber. "M0, what do you mean?" Kyle asked carefully. Before the AI could answer, the ground beneath them trembled. Not an earthquake. There was no atmosphere here, no wind, nothing that should move on its own. This was deliberate. Something enormous was approaching, and this time, it wasn't subtle about it. "Doc," Priya said, backing toward the entrance. "We need to go, now." They ran. Cale didn't look back at the pillar, didn't look back at the war frozen in alien light behind them, focused only on getting his crew back to the ship before whatever was coming reached the surface. They burst out into open dark just as the Wayward Ember's ramp came into view, and Cale's heart nearly stopped. The shadow was back. Not distant this time, not blotting out a star from millions of kilometers away. It hung directly above their ship, vast and close enough that Cale could feel something in his chest respond to it, a pressure behind his ribs that had nothing to do with the thin air escaping his suit. It wasn't attacking, it was watching, and then, slowly, deliberately, the shadow began to change shape, folding inward, condensing, taking on something almost like a form Cale's mind could grasp. something with an outline that made his blood run cold, because for one terrible instant, it looked almost human. Sears 55's voice broke through his calm, quiet, urgent, afraid in a way that no machine should ever sound. Kyle. It recognizes you. The shadow's half-formed shape turned toward him, and somewhere deep in Kale's mind, past language, past thought, he felt it looking back. The shadow moved toward Kale like it had all the time in the universe, and that was somehow worse than if it had rushed him. Kale, move! Priya's scream cut through his calm, but his legs wouldn't obey. He stood frozen at the base of the ramp, staring up at the half-formed shape descending toward him, and for one impossible second he wasn't afraid at all. He felt something closer to recognition, like meeting someone he'd known his whole life and only just now remembered their face. Doc Wren grabbed his arm and hauled him backward, breaking whatever hold the shadow had on him. Inside, now! They scrambled up the ramp as the shadow surged forward, and Kale felt it pass through the edge of his suit like cold water. A fraction of a second of contact that left every nerve in his arm screaming before the ramp sealed behind them, and Priya slammed the controls to get them airborne. The wayward ember tore off the planetoid's surface hard enough to throw everyone against the walls. Kyle clutched his arm, gasping, and when he looked down he saw thin lines spreading beneath his skin like frost on a window, faint and silver, already fading but leaving something behind. What did it do to you? Priya demanded, dropping into the pilot seat beside him, hands flying across controls. I don't know, Kyle said, and it was the truth, except it wasn't quite the truth, because behind his eyes fragments of images were already surfacing that weren't his own. A burning sky. A war fought in silence, in the vacuum between stars, by things too old and too vast to have names. He gritted his teeth and pushed the images down. Just fly. They didn't get far. A coalition enforcement vessel dropped out of hyperspace directly in their path, sleek and armored, running lights the deep crimson of a military ship on active alert. Kale's console lit up with a hail request before he'd even finished cursing. Unregistered vessel, you are in violation of Quarantine Directive VAR 110, a cold voice announced. Power down and prepare to be boarded, or you will be destroyed. Wonderful, Doc Wren muttered from behind them. Perfect timing. Kale opened the channel. This is the Wayward Ember. We're a civilian salvage crew, we didn't know. Ignorance is not a defense for trespass in a sealed system, the voice cut in. A figure appeared on the small view screen, an alien officer, tall and angular, plated skin the color of dark stone, eyes that held no patience whatsoever. I am Commander Varel of the Coalition Containment Fleet. You will surrender your vessel immediately. Doc Wren went rigid the moment the name left the speakers. Kale caught the reaction and filed it away, though there wasn't time to ask about it. Commander, listen to me, Kale said. Something's in that system. Something old. It just touched me and I don't know what it did, but I think you need to hear. I know precisely what is in that system, Varel said, voice dropping colder still. Which is exactly why it must remain sealed. Your presence has already compromised 11 centuries of containment. You will not leave this system alive. The enforcement vessel's weapons array lit up, targeting locks screaming across every screen on the Wayward Ember's bridge. Doc, Kale said quietly, tell me you have an idea. I have a bad one, Doc Wren said, already moving toward the comm console. He shouldered past Priya, keyed in a frequency Kale didn't recognize, and spoke a string of numbers and a name into the open channel. Varel. Designation 7-4 Ren. Containment Fleet, 2nd Division, before the Kesh anomaly. There was a long pause on the other end. When Varel spoke again, something in the cold precision of his voice had cracked just slightly. That designation was decommissioned, along with the officer who held it. I got better, Doc Wren said grimly. You were exiled for refusing a direct containment order. You allowed a fragment to escape. I refused to kill something that was still asking questions, Doc Wren said. Called it a fragment because that was easier than calling it what it actually was. A person. Or what was left of one. Kale stared at Doc Wren. 100 questions rising in his throat all at once, but there was no time. because the enforcement ship's weapons remained locked, and Viral's expression on the view screen had gone rigid with old, unresolved anger. "You have no authority here anymore, Ren," Viral said, "and your former crew has no protection under my orders." "Then let them go," Doc Ren said. "They're not part of this. It's me you want." "No," Kale said immediately. "Nobody's trading anybody." Priya hard burn now. Priya didn't need telling twice. She threw the wayward Ember into a violent turn, engines screaming past their rated output, cutting hard around the debris field between them and Viral's ship. Weapons fire lit up the black behind them, precise and merciless, one shot grazing close enough that the whole ship shuddered and alarms screamed through every deck. "Hull breach, Deck 2!" Priya shouted. Kyle's stomach dropped. Deck 2 was engineering. Deck 2 was where Priya should have been standing 5 minutes ago, and where she wasn't now only because she was flying, and he felt a cold spike of fear that had nothing to do with the ancient thing that had touched him, and everything to do with the very human fact that his crew, his family, was about to die because of a decision he'd made. "Doc, get down there," Kyle shouted. Doc Ren was already moving, sprinting for the corridor, and Kyle threw the ship into evasive patterns he barely had the skill to execute, weaving through debris while Viral's ship bore down on them with terrible, patient precision. Then, without warning, the weapons fire stopped. Kale risked a glance at the sensor display and felt his blood freeze. The shadow, the entity from the planetoid, had reappeared, hanging directly between the wayward Ember and Viral's enforcement vessel, vast and dark and utterly still. Viral's voice crackled back over the comm, no longer cold. Now it was something closer to fear. "All ships disengage. Disengage immediately." The enforcement vessel broke off, engines flaring as it retreated at a speed that told Kale everything he needed to know about how much Viral truly feared whatever hung silently in the space between them. The shadow didn't pursue. It simply turned, slow and deliberate, back toward the wayward Ember, and Kale felt that same cold water sensation slide across his mind again, gentler this time, almost careful. A voice, the same voice from before, resonating from somewhere beneath thought itself, spoke directly into his mind, and this time it wasn't a single word. "You do not yet understand what you are. But I have waited a very long time for a species willing to burn for each other with nothing to gain. I did not choose you, Kale Voss. I chose your kind. I chose—" The shadow pulled back into the dark, vanishing between one heartbeat and the next, and Kale sat frozen at the controls, Priya staring at him with wide eyes, both of them waiting for Doc Ren's voice over the comm to tell them whether the ship, whether any of them, were going to survive the night. The comm stayed silent for 3 full seconds. Then Doc Ren's voice came through, breathless, strained. "Priya's stable, but you need to see this. Now, both of you. Deck 2, the breach didn't happen where I thought." "What do you mean?" Kale asked. "I mean something came through that hull breach," Doc Ren said, "and it's already inside the ship." Kale reached Deck 2 with his rifle raised and his heart hammering so hard he could feel it in his throat, and what he found was not the monster he'd braced for. It was a girl, or something that looked like a girl. Small, pale, kneeling in the wreckage of a bent bulkhead, wrapped in a thin silver film that clung to her like a second skin. She wasn't breathing hard. She wasn't breathing at all as far as Kale could tell. Her eyes, when she lifted her head to look at him, held none of the panic a person should have after crashing through a hull breach into open vacuum and surviving. "Don't shoot," Doc Ren said quietly, stepping between Kale and the girl before he'd even decided whether to raise the rifle further. "She's not a threat. Look at her hands." Kale looked. Thin lines of silver ran beneath her skin, faint, fading. The exact same pattern the entity had left on his own arm less than an hour ago. "She came from it," Kale said slowly. "From the shadow." "I don't think she came from it," Doc Ren said. "I think she's part of it. A piece it sent ahead or split off, or I don't have the right words for what I'm looking at." The girl's gaze moved from Doc Ren to Kyle, and when she spoke, her voice was layered, faint echoes trailing every word. The same wrongness Kyle had heard through the ship's speakers back in Part 1. You carry its mark now, she said, looking at Kale's arm. That means it trusts you. It does not trust easily. Not anymore. Who are you? Kale asked. A fragment, a memory it kept of someone it lost. She tilted her head, studying him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. You want to know why it chose your species? I can show you if you allow it. Priya's voice crackled over the comm from the bridge, tight with worry. Kale, whatever's happening down there, make it quick. Viral's ship retreated, but I'm reading 2 more coalition signatures inbound. We don't have much time before this system fills up with people who want us dead. Kale looked at the girl, at the strange stillness in her eyes, and made a decision he'd spend the rest of the night questioning. Show me. She reached out and touched his marked arm, and the corridor around him dissolved. He stood somewhere else, someone else. A vast, dying system not unlike the one they'd just fled, except whole, alive, full of light instead of ruin. He watched, through eyes that weren't his own, a war unfold across the stars, an ancient civilization, the builders of the ruins on the planetoid, fighting something that didn't have a shape so much as an absence, a hunger that unmade whatever it touched. He watched them lose, watched their cities burn in silence, their fleets scattered, their knowledge and their names erased from every record they'd ever kept, until nothing remained but the guardian they'd built in desperation, the entity, the shadow, sealed here to hold the line against a threat too vast for any single species to face alone. He watched other species find this system over the centuries that followed, watched them recoil from what they found, seal the records, run, every single time. Not out of cruelty, but out of the same cold, ancient wisdom every old civilization eventually learned. Some fights aren't worth having. Some causes are already lost. Better to forget than to bleed for something already dead. Then he watched something different, a fractured memory, hazy at the edges, humans, decades ago, some earlier expedition Kale had never heard of, stumbling into contact with the Guardian by accident. Watched them panic, watched them fight, watched most of them die, and watched the handful who survived refuse to leave the ones who hadn't behind, dragging bodies they couldn't save through wreckage because leaving them was somehow worse than dying beside them. The vision released him and Kale staggered back against the corridor wall, gasping like he'd surfaced from deep water. That's not strategy, the girl said softly. That's not logic. Every species we have ever encountered calculates the cost before they act. Yours does too, and then acts anyway against the calculation because something in you values the person beside you more than the odds in front of you. It has been alone a very long time, waiting for something that still remembers how to do that. Doc Wren had gone quiet, and when Kale looked at him, the old medic's face had drained of color. That earlier expedition, Kale said. You knew about it, didn't you, Doc? That's what you meant back on the planetoid. That's the fragment you refused to kill. Doc Wren nodded slowly. I was there, 20 years ago. Containment fleet sent us in to erase all trace of an unauthorized contact. A research team that broke quarantine, same as us. Most of them died before we arrived. There was one survivor, and orders came down to eliminate her along with everything else. I couldn't do it. She wasn't a threat. She was just a scared kid who'd touched something bigger than she understood. He looked at the silver-marked girl in front of them, and something in his expression cracked open, old grief finally finding air after 20 years buried. I let her go, told my command she died in the breach. I've wondered every day since whether that was mercy or just cowardice. It was neither, the girl said. It was the same thing it saw in you just now, Kale Voss. And it remembered. The ship lurched violently, throwing all of them against the wall as new alarms tore through the corridor. Priya's voice cut through the comm, sharp with alarm. Kyle, we've got a problem. 3 coalition ships just dropped out of hyperspace and they are not talking. They're already opening fire. And there's civilian traffic caught between us and clear space. Refugee transport unarmed directly in the crossfire. Kale's blood ran cold. A refugee ship, unarmed, caught in the middle of a fight between the coalition and whatever the wayward Ember had become a target for. He didn't hesitate. and some distant part of him noted that he didn't hesitate, filed it away as exactly the kind of thing the girl beside him had just described. "Priya, get us between them and the fire," he said. "Doc, get to the guns. We're not letting that transport die because we brought trouble into this system." "Kale, our shields are already damaged. If we take a direct hit shielding that transport, then we take the hit," Kyle said. "Go." The girl watched him with an expression Kyle couldn't fully read, something between sorrow and recognition, as the ship rocked again, weapons fire lighting up the black outside every viewport. "It is already speaking to you," she said quietly, almost to herself. "It has not spoken to anyone directly in 1100 years. "What does that mean?" Kyle demanded, already moving toward the bridge. She looked at him, and for the first time something like fear crossed her ancient borrowed face. "It means the thing it was built to guard against has noticed the silence breaking," she said, "and it is not the only one who felt you arrive tonight." Behind her, deep in the ship's hull where the breach had torn through, something in the shadows the emergency lights didn't quite reach began, very quietly to move. The transport ship's distress signal was still screaming through the comm when Kale threw himself into the pilot seat beside Priya, and the first thing he saw on the viewport made his stomach drop straight through the floor. 3 coalition vessels, weapons blazing, converging on a slow, unarmed refugee transport that had no business being anywhere near a war zone. Between them and the transport, the wayward Ember looked like a toy about to be stepped on. "Shields at 60% and dropping," Priya called out. "Kyle, I can put us in the way, but we will not survive more than 2 direct hits." "Then we make sure we don't take 2, Kale said, already pulling the ship into position, angling their remaining shield strength toward the incoming fire. "Doc, guns." "On it." Doc Wren's voice came back tight with concentration, and a moment later the wayward Ember's modest turret array opened fire, not at the coalition ships, that would have been suicide, but at the incoming ordnance itself, picking off missiles meant for the fleeing transport one by one with the kind of precision that told Kale exactly how many years Doc Wren had spent doing this exact job for people who never thanked him for it. The silver-marked girl appeared in the cockpit doorway, steady despite the ship rocking beneath her feet. "You are protecting strangers," she said, watching Kale with that same unreadable expression. "At cost to yourselves. Again." "Not really the time," Kale snapped, hauling the ship through a hard turn as a shot grazed their shields hard enough to throw sparks across the console. "It is exactly the time," she said, "because it is watching, and it needs to understand why. Ask your machine." Kale blinked. "What?" 455 drifted up beside the girl, its optical ring pulsing in that same uneven, fractured rhythm it had shown since they entered the system, and this time, when it spoke, its voice came out entirely different, deeper, layered, carrying an accent that belonged to no language Kale had ever heard from the little AI before. "I remember this," M055 said. "I remember fighting beside something like this once, a very long time ago. Maro, now is really not the time for a diagnostic glitch," Kale said, wrestling the ship through another turn as Doc Wren's guns barked again behind him. "It is not a glitch," the girl said quietly. "Your machine is not what you think it is, Kale Voss. It never has been." The transport cleared the debris field and jumped safely into hyperspace. And the moment it vanished, one of the 3 coalition ships broke off pursuit and turned its full attention toward the wayward Ember instead. "Kyle, that's not good," Priya said, watching the sensor readout. "That's Vral's ship, and it's not backing off this time." Kale's comm crackled open without him touching it, Vral's voice cutting through, cold and furious. "You have violated containment protocol beyond any tolerance I can extend. Prepare to be boarded and searched." "For what?" Kale demanded. "For the fragment," Vral said. "We've tracked an unauthorized signature aboard your vessel for years, Voss. Ever since you salvaged a derelict research outpost on the edge of the Kesh debris field. Your ship has been carrying contraband this entire time, and you never even knew it." Kale's blood went cold. The Kesh debris field. That was the salvage job 3 years ago. the one where he'd found M055, half buried in wreckage, powered down, and brought it home like a stray because something about the little unit had felt worth saving. "Mazero," Cale said slowly, turning in his seat. "What is he talking about?" The AI's optical ring dimmed, then flared bright, and its voice, when it answered, cracked with something that sounded painfully, impossibly, like grief. "I did not lie to you," M055 said. "I simply did not remember. Not until tonight. Not until I came close enough to what I used to be." "What you used to be?" Cale repeated. "I am not artificial intelligence, Cale. I never was. I am a fragment of the same civilization that built the Guardian outside this ship. A piece of a mind, sealed into a shell small enough to hide, small enough to survive when everything else was lost. I do not know how long I slept in that wreckage before you found me. I only know that when your hands lifted me out of the dark, some small part of me that was still awake decided you were worth waking up for." The ship rocked hard as Vral's vessel opened fire in earnest, no longer trying to disable, now trying to kill. Doc Wren's guns answered, but they both knew the Wayward Ember couldn't survive a sustained assault from a full Coalition enforcement vessel. "It's not hunting me," Cale realized aloud, looking at the girl, at M055, understanding crashing over him all at once. "It never was. It's hunting M0. It's trying to get its own people back." "Yes," the girl said. "And no. It wishes to protect what remains of what it lost. But the Coalition fears the same thing for entirely different reasons. They do not want a fragment of that old war reawakening anywhere they cannot control it. To them, your machine is not a person. It is a weapon that might remember how to fight." "I am not a weapon," M055 said, and for the first time its voice held something unmistakably like fear. "I do not want to be a weapon again. I do not want to lose myself the way the Guardian outside has been losing itself for 1100 years alone, holding a line no one remembers the reason for. Cale, please. I do not want to go back to what I was." Cale looked at the trembling AI unit. No, not an AI, a person. A fragment of someone who had chosen, 3 years ago, half buried in wreckage, to keep existing because a stranger had reached out a hand and felt the decision make itself before he'd finished thinking it through. "Nobody's taking you anywhere," Cale said. "Voss," Vral's voice snapped through the comm, ship shuddering under renewed fire. "Stand down and surrender the fragment, or I will end this myself." "No," Cale said simply. There was a pause. Then Vral's voice again, quieter, almost tired. "You don't understand what you're protecting." "I understand it's scared," Cale said. "That's enough for me." The dead star's shadow returned then, all at once, vast and sudden, swallowing the space between the Wayward Ember and Vral's ship entirely. Weapons fire stopped. Every sensor screamed contradictory readings, and Cale watched Vral's vessel, and the 2 Coalition ships behind it, go completely still, held in place by something none of their weapons could touch. The girl closed her eyes, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of the entity itself, speaking through her like water through a broken vessel. "I did not bring you into this system to test you," it said, through her, through the ship, through the marrow of everyone standing on that bridge. "I brought you here because I am dying, and I am the only thing standing between everything you know and the hunger that killed my people 11 centuries ago. It has felt the silence break tonight. It is already coming, and I no longer have the strength to hold the line alone." Cale stared at the vast shape hanging silent and enormous outside the viewport, and felt the true shape of the night finally settle over him. Not a treasure hunt gone wrong, not a rescue, not even a war between humans and Coalition ships. Something ancient, something that had held back the true dark for over 1,000 years, was finally running out of time, and it had chosen humanity to stand where it could no longer stand alone. The dead star trembled, and for the first time in 1100 years something inside it woke up hungry. Cale felt it before the sensors registered anything at all. A pressure behind his eyes, the same cold water sensation the entity's touch had left on his arm, except now it was coming from somewhere far below the star's surface, vast and patient and utterly without mercy. On the viewport, the black husk of the dead sun began to crack, thin lines of pale light spreading across its surface like frost breaking under weight. Kyle. Priya's voice had gone very quiet. Whatever that is, it's not the shadow, it's bigger. I don't have a bigger, Kyle said. I don't have a plan for bigger. The girl standing in the cockpit doorway, the entity's fragment, its memory of someone it had lost, turned toward the viewport with an expression that finally, after everything, looked afraid. It has been sealed since the Guardian sacrificed everything to trap it here. The Guardian has held that seal alone for 11 centuries. Tonight, holding it cost the last of what strength remained. So it's dying, Doc Wren said grimly, and taking the lid off the thing it's been sitting on for 1,000 years. Vral's voice cut through the calm, no longer cold, no longer commanding, just a soldier staring at the same impossible light spreading across a dead star, doing the arithmetic every good officer does when the odds stop making sense. Voss, my ships are still combat capable, yours is not. Whatever you're planning, I need to know now because in about 90 seconds I am either fighting beside you or running, and I would like to make that choice with my eyes open. Kale looked at Doc Wren, at Priya, at the trembling AI unit floating near the console, a fragment of an ancient people who had chosen, 3 years ago, to keep existing because a stranger reached out a hand. Fight with us, Kale said. Please. There was a long pause. Then Vral's voice again, rough with something that hadn't been there before. Wren, 20 years ago, the one you let go. I read that file 100 times trying to understand why an officer with your record would throw away a career over one anomaly. A beat. I think I finally understand. Good, Doc Wren said. Don't waste it feeling guilty. Point your guns at the thing trying to eat us. The star's surface split fully open, and the darkness that poured out was not shadow, not smoke, not anything Kale had a word for. It was absence given shape, an emptiness that made the ship's hull groan just from proximity. The same hunger the girl had shown him in her vision, unmade, unaged, still starving after 1,100 years of imprisonment. The Guardian rose to meet it. Kale watched the vast familiar shape unfold from where it had been resting near the debris ring, spreading itself across the black between the wayward ember and the thing tearing its way out of the dead star. It was smaller than it had been in Part 1, thinner, straining visibly to hold a form at all. I cannot win this alone, the voice said, inside all of them at once, weaker now, threadbare. I never could. I only bought time. I am asking you now for the thing my own people never learned to ask for from strangers. Help. How? Kyle shouted, though there was no one physical to shout at. What do we even do against that? The girl closed her eyes. It needs a conduit, a living mind willing to lend its strength, to hold the seal shut long enough for the Guardian to strike at the breach directly. It will not survive the attempt without help. Neither will whoever lends their strength unless... Unless what? Kyle demanded. Unless more than one mind shares the weight, M055 finished quietly, drifting forward, optical ring steady for the first time all night. I remember how this worked, Kale. I was built for exactly this once, a long time ago, before I was small enough to hide in wreckage. I can do it, but I cannot do it alone either. I need an anchor, someone it already trusts. Kyle understood before M055 finished speaking, and some old, stubborn, entirely human part of him didn't hesitate even for a second. Then anchor to me. Kyle, no, Priya started. There isn't another option, Kyle said, already moving toward M055, already rolling up the sleeve over the silver-marked skin on his arm. Priya, keep this ship in one piece, Doc. Help Vral hold that breach as long as you can. This is the only move we've got. Priya's hand caught his wrist before he reached M055, and for a moment neither of them said anything. The weight of every year they'd spent scraping by together compressed into that single grip. You come back from this, she said. That's an order, not a request. Wouldn't dream of disobeying my engineer, Kyle said, and meant it more than any joke he'd ever made. M055's small housing pressed against his marked arm, and the world dissolved into light. Cale felt himself stretched thin across something vast, his own thoughts tangled with M055's ancient, fragmented memory, and the Guardian's failing strength. All three woven together into a single thread, stretched taut across the breach in the dead star. He felt the hunger on the other side, endless, patient, indifferent to whether it consumed a species that had existed for 100 years or 10,000. It simply consumed, because that was the only thing it had ever known how to do. "This is what killed my people," the Guardian's voice said, quieter now, almost gentle, speaking directly into the space where Cale's mind and M055's memory had blurred together. "We could not outfight it. We could only slow it. I have spent 1100 years learning patience I never had in life. You have not had time to learn that patience, Cale Voss. And yet here you are anyway." "Then let's not waste it," Cale said, or thought, or somehow both, and pushed everything he had, every stubborn, reckless, entirely human piece of himself, into the seal. Outside, in the space no thought could fully capture, the Guardian struck. It gave everything it had left, unraveling itself into the breach the way a dam gives everything to hold back a flood. And for one impossible moment, held by three minds instead of one, the ancient hunger recoiled. The star's surface cracked open moments before began, slowly, agonizingly, to seal shut again. The Guardian did not survive the effort. Cale felt it go, felt the vast patient presence that had watched over a dead system for 11 centuries finally lay down a weight it had carried alone for far too long, and in its last moment it did not feel like an ending. It felt like relief. "Thank you," it said, to all of them, to humanity, to the very small, very young species that had done what none of the old and mighty civilizations before them had been willing to try. "I did not choose wrong." Cale came back to himself, gasping on the cockpit floor, Priya's hands gripping his shoulders, Doc Wren shouting something he couldn't quite parse yet, and Mero 55 dark and silent beside him, its optical ring flickering weakly but still, unmistakably, alive. Outside the viewport, the dead star hung exactly where it always had, black, cold, sealed once more. But something had changed in the light of it, a faint new pulse at its core, steady and small, like a held breath finally released. Voral's ship drifted alongside the wayward Ember, quiet, weapons powered down. When his voice came through the comm, it held none of the cold command from before, only something rawer, something that sounded for the first time almost like respect. "I have filed containment reports on this system for 11 years, Voss," Voral said. "I have never once had to write down that a civilian salvage crew held a line my entire fleet would not have survived alone." "Don't get used to it," Cale said, voice hoarse, exhausted, alive. "Next time send a bigger warning label." There was a pause, and then, unmistakably, something in Voral's voice that might almost have been a laugh. "I will recommend the Coalition reconsider its assessment of your species. It seems overdue." 455 stirred beside him, optical ring steadying into its familiar soft blue, though something in its presence felt different now, lighter, somehow, like a weight it had carried unknowingly for years had finally been set down. "I am staying," it said quietly. "Not as a weapon, not as what I was, but someone should watch this seal in case it ever needs holding again. I would rather it be someone who chooses it than someone who is simply left behind to do it." Cale looked at the small unit that had ridden beside him through 3 years of salvage runs, never once revealing what it truly carried inside, and felt something in his chest ache in a way he hadn't expected. "You don't have to stay alone," he said. "I know," M055 said. "That is exactly why I'm choosing to." They buried the Guardian's memory the way it deserved, not with ceremony but with the quiet human stubbornness of people who refused to let something that mattered simply disappear. Doc Wren stood at the edge of the ramp a long time before the wayward Ember finally turned for open space, looking back at the ruins on the planetoid, at 20 years of guilt finally set down beside a debt finally repaid. Priya flew them out past the debris ring, past Voral's ship standing quiet watch, past the edge of the quarantine line that had once felt like the boundary of everything forbidden, and now simply felt like the edge of a story no one back home would fully believe. Cale sat in the co-pilot's seat, arm still faintly marked with silver lines that would never quite fade, and thought about a species old enough to have built empires and lost them, old enough to have learned every kind of caution there was, and how it had taken a handful of broke, stubborn, frightened humans to remind the galaxy what it looked like to stand and hold a line for no reason but that someone else needed it held. The dead star shrank behind them, small and quiet, and for the first time in 1100 years no longer entirely alone. Cale didn't know yet what waking that silence had truly set in motion, out past the edges of known space, in the dark where older, hungrier things had also felt the Guardian's line finally speak again after 1,000 years of silence. But for tonight, flying home with his crew alive and a new friend keeping watch behind them, that was a worry for another day. Tonight, humanity had earned its seat at the table, and somewhere far beyond the reach of any star chart, something ancient and patient had finally noticed them back.